Welcome back, everybody. Just swinging back to drop some quick picks for UFC 285 Jones versus Gane. And it's good to finally get some good fights again after a couple of weeks of, pretty subpar cards. But in keeping to the theme of keeping this quick, let's get right into the breakdowns for UFC 285. And kicking off the card, we have Blackshear versus Farid Basharat, and Basharat's the minus 500 favorite. Blackshear's the plus 350 underdog, and this is the only fight on the card that I really didn't look into at all. I remember Blackshear being primarily a grappler who fought Zalal in his debut on short notice. The fight ended up being a draw, and it was overall, I felt like a pretty uneventful fight, which is typically how a Zalal fight plays out. But in any case, I do think that, Blackshear's got a decent skill set, and, I don't think he's a bad fighter overall, and, he should have some of the grappling to fall back on in this fight. But with Basharat, I don't really know much about him aside from the fact that he's Javid's brother. But if he's got 70% of the cardio and the skills that Javid's got, he should be able to win this fight. That said, though, the line looks like it might be a bit out of hand, because I do think Blackshear is a solid enough grappler that he may be able to pose a threat on the mat here. But it looks like they're pricing Farid like he's his brother, and, I just don't know if I'm fully on board with that. But I guess I'll just go with Basharat for, the sake of the narrative. I do think that, if his cardio is good enough, he should be able to get it done here. Blackshear, he did show up short notice against the law, but he really didn't look good down the stretch. And, if Basharat's cardio holds up here, I do think he should be able to get it done. So I guess I'll just go with Basharat here to win, I guess by decision. And next up, we have Jessica Penne versus Tabatha Ricci. Ricci's the minus 275 favorite. Penne's the plus 235 underdog. And straight up, it's kind of hard to get onto the Penne side here. I've been saying it for a while now, and with Penne, I just feel like she had a couple of very fortunate bounces since returning from her layoff. She got gifted a split decision against Godinez, who fought like an idiot in that fight, and Kowalkiewicz, just jumps into the guard of Penne, given Penne really her only win condition, and gets submitted in the first round. But overall, I kind of just feel that Penne's a little washed. I don't think she looked great against Godinez. In fact, I don't think she's looked good at all since her comeback, right? She was getting battered on the feet and tossed around by Godinez. The Kowalkiewicz fight ended pretty quickly, so it's kind of hard to really say much based off of that performance. But against Cody was able to kind of just pick her apart at distance. So yeah, I really don't think Penne's looked really all that good. But she's going up against Ricci, who does pose a much different stylistic matchup than, her previous opponents. And while Ricci, she is undersized, she's very persistent with her takedowns and her grappling. And I feel like that is going to be enough for her to win this fight. Penne is likely the better striker and should be able to win the striking exchanges. She's taller, she's longer, and, is overall the more technical boxer. But Penne is horrendous takedown defense. She will play off her back. And Ricci, she is someone, she does know what her strengths are, and she will play towards them. She is pretty aggressive with the takedowns. I think was able to hit, 4 or 5 takedowns in her last couple of fights. Wasn't able to do too much with them because, I do think that Ricci, she kind of lacks the physicality to really be able to find a finish on the mat. So probably going to be a bit more of a lay and pray sort of fight if Ricci were to win, which is a little concerning if you're going to lay the minus 275 on her. But I do think she's going to get it done here. I think this is going to play out somewhat similarly to her last 2 fights against Viviane and Oliveira, where, on the feet, it's not like a massive discrepancy, but, I do think that she's going to fall behind if it's in the striking for too long. But I do think that she's going to be able to hit takedowns, rack up enough control time to win a decision here. So give me Ricci by a decision. And next up, we have Martinez versus Saaiman, and Saaiman's the minus 275 favorite. Martinez is the plus 235 underdog. So Martinez, in my opinion, has just been a complete flop at the UFC level. I remember watching some of this guy's tape on the regionals and thinking he could make some highlight reels. He'll be in some pretty fun fights. He does look like a pretty heavy-handed guy with some dynamic striking, but outside of the spinning back fist against Lawrence, I really don't think he's looked that good. He's just a little too passive in there sometimes. Split decision against Guido Canetti, of all people, and a split decision against Brandon Davis. Two guys who have kind of been around, not the worst fighters ever, but definitely did not live up to the expectation that I had for Martinez. He has shown some flashes in there when he's putting it together, but, a lot of times he's just been a little too passive in there. He does have some power in his hands, but he just hasn't really been able to close out fights at the UFC level either. 2 knockdowns against Lawrence, but no finish, 2 knockdowns against Davis, and no finish there either. So not to say he isn't dangerous or anything. I still do think that Martinez can crack in there, but, he might not just be as heavy of a hitter as I thought he was, coming into the UFC. That said, though, he's up against Saaiman, who is still a very young, very raw sort of fighter, a guy who I don't think is very technical at all. I feel like Saaiman's kind of gotten carried a bit by his toughness, his cardio, and physicality, which, it's been working well for him so far. I feel like he's going to be quite a bit, or very tough to deal with, when his skills do catch up with him. But I remember on the Contender Series fight, he was getting picked apart at distance before his opponent just gassed out. The guy short notice against him was able to get some top time against him, but he kind of fell apart too. So Saaiman, he's been able to leverage his aggressiveness and tenacity very well, and that could come back to bite him in this fight. Martinez, he is pretty good, on the counter. He is pretty quick, so I definitely can see Saaiman potentially getting clipped if he's a little too wild in there. But Saaiman has shown some really good toughness, and Martinez has shown that he can give up takedowns, he can give up control time, and I do think that Saaiman may be able to take advantage of that. I do think that Saaiman's going to be the more physical guy in there, and I feel like he's going to be able to use that to kind of just bully Martinez a little bit in there, control him on the mat, and win, I'd say, a 29-28 decision here. So give me Saaiman by decision. And moving along, we have Ian Garry versus Song Kenan, and Garry is the minus 600 favorite. Kenan is the plus 425 favorite, and we have a guy in Garry who is on the come up. He's pretty well rounded. He's got that karate style on the feet, pretty good movement and footwork. He has shown he can mix in the wrestling as well. Was largely a finisher on the regionals, but since coming to the UFC, hasn't quite been able to convert. He's I think gone up against guys who are just a little more durable and a little more defensively sound, so a little harder for him to find the finishes at the UFC level. And also, he was hitting a lot of head kicks on the regional scene, which, he likes to set up there, but I feel like opponents may have gotten a bit more of a read on it and are maybe a little more prepared to defend against it. Song Kenan, on the other hand, I don't remember too much about this guy aside from I think he's kind of bad. He seems like a pretty one-dimensional boxer with some power in his hands, kind of plotty as well. So I think that Garry should be able to take it here. I feel like Garry should be able to kind of just dance circles around this guy and be able to touch him up at distance. I feel like Song might have some trouble, tracking Garry down. And if Song isn't able to land a big shot on Garry, I think Gary's going to be able to just out volume and out damage him. As far as an official pick, I'm actually kind of leaning on the knockout side here for Garry. It seems like guys who are maybe just a little more technical on the feet is able to find the chin of Song. That said, guys that are knocking Song out are guys like Adesanya and Riddell and Griffin, who are veterans and very high-level fighters. Garry definitely not as proven as these guys, but I do think he's got the tools here to get it done. That said, minus 600 is a little ridiculous. He's young and has a lot of potential, and he, is probably improving fight to fight, but he hasn't really shown he's minus 600 material yet, because, it wasn't too long ago that this guy was getting touched up by Jordan Williams. And Song, he is, somewhat seasoned in there. He's actually had a few UFC fights under his belt and does have quite a few regional fights as well. Not the best competition, but, I don't think he's too far off from a Jordan Williams in there. So, I wouldn't completely count him out here, but I do think Garry ultimately gets it done here. But official pick, I'll go with Garry. I guess I'll take him to win by round 1 knockout. I think he'll land that head kick that he's been really trying to land lately. So, yeah, give me Garry by round 1 knockout. And next up, we have Julian Marquez versus Marc-André Barriault, and Barriault's the minus 125 favorite. Marquez is the plus 105 underdog, and this should be a pretty fun fight between a couple of pretty scrappy guys in there. I do think between the two, Marc-André is probably the more technical fighter, whereas Marquez is probably going to be the slightly more physical guy in there. I think he's probably going to be landing the bigger shots. But the issue with Marquez is I just don't think he's really all that skilled. I don't really rate his wins at all. I think his best win is probably Maki Pitolo, and Pitolo was on his way to winning a 29-28 decision before just completely fumbling at the end there. Marc-André Barriault doesn't exactly have the best wins either, but at least he's shown he could beat these big lumbering guys who could, hit hard and have suspect gas tanks. And Marc-André, when he's not getting finished, he is going to some pretty competitive decisions against guys like Park and Jocko and Sanchez. I'd say somewhat respectable names compared to the guys that, Marquez has been in there and performed against. So I do kind of lean Marc-André a little bit more in this fight. I think both guys have okay cardio. Both do a pretty good job of just digging deep and fighting through the fatigue. They'll be able to beat guys with bad cardio, but against guys with much better cardio, like a Hernandez or a Park, they're probably going to struggle a bit. So I do think the cardio is a bit of a wash here, but I think Marc-André probably edges it a little bit more if I had to pick. But for those reasons, I'll go with Marc-André here. I just kind of favor him more to win down the stretch. And overall, I just like what I've seen from Marc-André a little bit more than Marquez, if I'm being honest. So official pick, I'll go with Marc-André Barriault, and I'll take him to win by decision. And moving along, we have Viviane Araujo versus Amanda Ribas, and Ribas is the minus 120 favorite. Araujo is the plus 100 underdog, and this is a pretty interesting fight. I remember thinking that Ribas was the side when they had it first booked, but then I remembered Ribas actually might have one of the worst chins as far as women's MMA goes, and it might sound like an exaggeration, but thinking about it, how many female fighters are getting rocked and hurt like she is, like off the top of my head, it's kind of hard to think of too many like that. And oftentimes in women's MMA, TKO stoppages are more so mercy stoppages where you have one fighter kind of just curled up against the cage and the ref has to call the fight. But when it comes to Ribas, she gets knocked out pretty badly. It was in her fight against Viviane. She got knocked out bad in that fight. Against Rodriguez, she got knocked out twice in the same fight. She got dropped by Verna, who is a grappler. So I'm not really liking what I see in terms of the durability from Ribas. And as far as women's MMA goes, Araujo does have some pretty heavy hands. She's got pretty good boxing as well. Ribas, is probably going to have the volume and the cardio and the grappling advantage. But, if Araujo is able to stuff the takedowns, which, she's shown really good takedown defense historically, this could give Ribas a lot of troubles on the feet. That said, I don't think that, Araujo's really shown she could defend a lot of the hip tosses, which Ribas really does like to go to. That said, though, if Ribas is forced to stand here, I do think that there's a chance she gets knocked out. I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. Usually when it comes to women's fights, I don't really like predicting a knockout, but with Ribas, I definitely think that's on the table here. And for Ribas to win, I do think she's going to have to hit takedowns because it seems historically Ribas has struggled against fighters who are just better strikers than her. She's been able to win when she's able to really mix in the wrestling and the grappling. And I do think that down the stretch, if Ribas, doesn't get hurt badly in the first or second round, she probably could start hitting takedowns. Araujo, we've seen, does kind of slow down a bit as fights progress, especially if you're pushing a bit of a wrestling, grappling pace on her. And, Ribas, she does have pretty good volume and cardio. She does like to push a pace in there. So I can see Ribas starting to maybe take over later on in the fight. But early on, I'm just really concerned that Ribas is going to take a big shot and go down because, Ribas, aside from being chinny, is, pretty poor defensively. If you look at her defensive striking numbers, they're really good on paper, but I think it's just because she grapples a lot. But if you actually watch her on the feet, she's walking into punches a lot. And even though she does move her head quite a bit on the feet, I don't think it's super effective. She still gets timed in there pretty easily. Opponents are able to land pretty flush on her a lot. So I just don't trust Ribas enough defensively on the feet and her chin enough for me to really to really be confident in her not to get knocked out here. So I think I'll just go with Araujo to win by round 1 knockout here. I like Ribas, but she hasn't shown she could really beat a decent striker yet. So give me Araujo, and give me Araujo by round 1 knockout. And moving along, we have Dricus du Plessis versus Derek Brunson, and du Plessis is the minus 205 favorite. Brunson is the plus 175 underdog, and du Plessis just one of these guys who I feel like is able to just keep getting away with it. And long story short, I think he's going to continue to do so here. It's a pretty interesting stylistic matchup here in that du Plessis hasn't really fought a good wrestler yet. But the issue is, Brunson is getting up there in age. He doesn't react well to getting hit whatsoever. Like, if you're able to land a big shot on him, he starts to panic in there, and his shots get really telegraphed. His body language completely changes in there, and it's just not a great look. And I do think that du Plessis is going to be able to land something big in there. His really weird, wonky striking style is probably going to give Brunson some issues, getting a read on du Plessis. So I think du Plessis is going to be able to land something big and knock Brunson out. Potentially, maybe we see if du Plessis' takedown defense and get-ups are going to be able to hold up here, but I don't know if it's really going to get tested here. I think du Plessis is really going to be able to put hands on Brunson early in the fight and get the knockout before we really see any part of his takedown defense get tested here. So, I think Brunson had a nice little run here, definitely overachieved a little bit, but I think we're going to go back to seeing Brunson just getting brutally knocked out. So, official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with du Plessis to win by round 1 knockout. And moving along, we have Cody Garbrandt versus Trevin Jones. Garbrandt's the minus 170 favorite. Jones is the plus 145 underdog, and I think Cody Garbrandt is the side here. His biggest liability is his chin. And Jones, he has shown he has one-punch knockout power when he can connect, but that's about it. With Jones, he's too low volume. His takedown defense is no good. His bottom game is no good. So really his most realistic shot of winning is going to be by knockout, which obviously can happen because he's up against Cody no chin. But Cody, in my opinion, is just the better fighter everywhere. I think he's the better boxer. He's the better wrestler. His footwork is much better in there. He's not the highest volume guy, but, I do think he's much better than Jones in terms of just putting out volume. And even though Cody's been around a little longer, he's actually going to be the younger guy in this fight. But obviously the big issue with Cody is you really just can't lay juice on a guy who's shown he's got durability issues, especially against someone like Jones, who can land that knockout shot. But I do got to go with Cody here. If he is able to stay safe in there, he should be able to win. I'd say a pretty clear decision. And typically when Cody is getting hurt and knocked out, it's when he's brawling or when he's getting blitzed by a much quicker guy in Kai Kara-France. I just don't think that Jones is really going to be able to bring that here. Jones not a very pressure-heavy fighter, a guy who is willing to concede the back foot and let opponents lead the dance. Just doesn't bring a ton of volume either. So, I don't think Cody's going to have to, brawl in this fight. I think Cody, if he's smart, he's able to pick his shots in there and kind of just pick Trevin apart and maybe hit some takedowns as well. Cody, Cody's a solid wrestler, but he doesn't really go to it too much. But I feel like he can go to it here to score and stay safe. So the official pick, I'm going to go with Cody here, probably to win by decision. I feel like he probably could get the knockout, maybe. Cody can crack, but Trevin has shown really good durability, and I think the last thing that Cody would want is to hurt Trevin and then kind of swarm him and maybe get caught with something against Jones. So I think he maybe just plays it safe in this spot and likely just wins it by decision. So give me Cody by decision. And kicking off the main card, we have Bo Nickal versus Jamie Pickett, and Nickal's the minus 1,800 favorite. Pickett is the plus 750 underdog. So this is pretty clearly a setup fight here. Nickal, obviously the hype prospect, but Nickal, he is 3-0, and I feel like he does need a bit of time to get built up a bit, and I do think this is a decent step up. I think this is as bad of an opponent as you can get that still has some recognition in the sport. I mean, the fact that Pickett's been on the Contender Series 3 times really says it all. But beyond that, when has Pickett really ever actually looked good? I mean, if you look at all of his fights, he's kind of just looked like ass in all of his performances. So I do think Nickal is going to be able to roll here. Usually the concern is with these big juiced favorites who are still kind of green in their career is that they kind of blow their load early. But even if Nickal goes out there hard early, goes for the takedowns, looks for the ground and pound and isn't able to get the finish, Pickett's just got no killer instinct in there. He made Punahele Soriano look like Punahele's got good cardio in there. And we all know Puna's a one-round fighter at this point with pretty dog shit cardio. So, the fact that Puna was able to decision Pickett, and not just decision him, it was a pretty dominant 30-27 decision, really does not leave much confidence here with Pickett. So even if Nickal does somehow blow his load in there and isn't able to get Pickett out of there, I'm not confident in Pickett's ability to be able to fight his way back and find the finish. So yeah, I'm going to go with Nickal here. I do think he actually finds a finish early. I think he's going to be able to hit the takedowns, land some pretty nasty ground and pound, and find the submission. Pickett has shown he's a somewhat tough guy in there, but his submission defense overall is really bad. I can see him just maybe giving up the neck after taking some ground and pound, or just getting triangle choked in there early. Nickal's a really strong guy with a really tight squeeze. So official pick for this fight, I'm going to go with Nickal to win by round 1 submission. And moving along, we have Jalin Turner versus Mateusz Gamrot, and Gamrot's the minus 205 favorite. Turner's the plus 175 underdog, and Gamrot is going to be coming in short notice for this fight, which is pretty risky for him, if I'm being honest, especially on short notice. Turner, obviously a very dangerous fighter early on, but does have a tendency to fade later on in fights. And the fact that Gamrot is taking this fight on short notice leads me to believe that maybe he's confident in his ability to survive the early onslaught. And it does make sense. I don't think Gamrot's really shown a ton of durability issues in his career. On top of that, Gamrot, he is pretty good defensively, very technical in there. But at the same time, I don't think he's faced quite a heavy hitter like Turner, who also is going to have a pretty significant size and reach advantage. That said, I do have to favor Gamrot in this spot. He's just far more well-rounded. I think that the cardio and the grappling is going to be what carries him in this fight. Assuming he doesn't just get knocked out or hurt really badly in that first round, I do think that he's going to be able to lean on his cardio and his wrestling to win the fight. We have seen Turner really slow down later in the fight. We have seen him give up takedowns in top control time. So I do think that's a path for Gamrot, but he's going to have to take, I think, a ton of damage early in the fight, which, is a bit concerning, especially, coming in short notice. But official pick for this fight, I'll go with Gamrot to win by decision, but, not super confident. I do think that Turner's pretty live in the spot, but official pick, I'll go with Gamrot to win by decision. And moving along, we have Geoff Neal versus Shavkat Rakhmonov, and Rakhmonov's the minus 500 favorite. Neal is the plus 375 underdog. So right off the bat, I do think that Neal may be getting a little bit disrespected here, but I do think that stylistically this is going to be a pretty tough fight for him. I've always said that with Neal, he's a guy who does best against against fighters who are going to just stand in front of him and bang with him. Just looking at his previous matchups, looking at his wins and losses, he's largely able to win against strikers or guys who are more so brawlers in there, with his losses being to crafty veterans like Wonderboy and Magny, who aren't going to oblige him in the striking, guys who are going to either look to use their footwork to get around him or kind of push the grappling a little bit to make him uncomfortable in there. And with Rakhmonov, Rakhmonov, he is a very, very potent grappler, and I feel like that's going to be the path of least resistance for him. But even on the feet, Rakhmonov, not really a guy that's looking to swing in the pocket. Rakhmonov, I'd say a little more calculated and reserved to the striking. Not the highest volume striking guy either, but he does throw with intent, he does throw with power, and he does pick his shots pretty well in there. So even at distance, I kind of see this being, somewhat competitive, with Rakhmonov just having a lot of grappling upside. But Neal has shown really good takedown defense, and if he is able to keep it standing, Rakhmonov definitely won't look like a minus 500. But at the same time, I really don't think that Neal's faced quite a grappler like Rakhmonov, who also has some very, very vicious ground and pound. And Rachmanov probably going to be one of the more physical grapplers that Neal's gone up against. So I do think that Neal might be able to put up some resistance early, but I do think that Rachmanov's eventually going to get this fight to the ground where he should have a pretty big advantage. So official pick for this fight, I am going to go with Rachmanov, and I'll take him to win by round 2 submission. And in the co-main event, we have Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso, and Shevchenko is the minus 600 favorite. Grasso is the plus 650 underdog. And I like Grasso, but I think this is Shevchenko all day. I just don't think that Grasso really fits the archetype to give Shevchenko any problems. Like before, I bet Santos because Santos is physical and can grapple, which kind of plays into the weakness of Shevchenko. That's been exploited before, but with Grasso, I just don't think that she's going to be able to pose much threat there, or really anywhere, if I'm being honest. I think that Grasso, she still is a bit undersized overall. Definitely undersized in this matchup. But beyond that, I don't think she's a very big hitter or a massive submission threat either. She's good at putting volume out there. She's got good boxing, but Shevchenko is going to be the much heavier hitter. She's going to be blasting those body and head kicks. I think it's going to really deter Grasso from throwing as much as she usually does. And then I also think there's going to be just a very clear path in the grappling and wrestling for Shevchenko as well. Grasso, pretty subpar takedown defense, in my opinion. She's been finished on the mat before. A lot of wrestlers like Esparza did have, success taking her down. So, Shevchenko being the much bigger and much more physical fighter in there should be able to take Grasso down and likely maul her there. So I'm going to go with Shevchenko, and I'll take her to win by round 3 submission. And in the main event, we have Jon Jones versus Ciryl Gane, and Jones is the minus 160 favorite. Gane's the plus 140 underdog, and, very interesting fight. It's always tough to break down a fight when you have a fighter taking this long of a layoff. I know Jones is an elite athlete, arguably one of the greatest of all time, but 3 years off after 2, pretty subpar performances by his standards is still very concerning. And on top of that, he is going to be moving up a weight class, so you just never know how he's going to look and how he's going to perform with all that extra weight on him. On top of that, it is a 3-year layoff for him, and he's up against Gane, who is a fighter who's, kind of lighting up the heavyweight division, but, the truth is, I think that Gane still is pretty green. His striking looks phenomenal for a heavyweight, very good movement, very good footwork and distance management, but he has shown he's got a big hole in the takedown defense in the ground game. And overall, I just don't think that Gane's quite established himself as an elite fighter just yet, whereas Jones has. If you look at just Gane's resume, I think his best win is probably Volkov, which is very respectable, but, Jones has gone out there and he's beat some of the most skilled and dangerous and well-rounded fighters in the history of the sport, whereas Gane's really only beaten just big, lumbering heavyweight strikers, and he did get out-wrestled by Ngannou, which is going to be a big talking point this week. And with all that being said, it's still going to be a very tough fight just because of all the uncertainty and the question marks about Jones moving up and coming off of the long layoff. The line movement's been pretty crazy from what I've seen so far. It looks like there's been a lot of love on the Jones side, which I do get. Seeing Gane's fight against Ngannou, I do think that's potentially a path for Jones here. Jones, very, very good wrestler here. But the thing is, Gane, I feel like, is probably going to have worked on his takedown defense quite a bit since then. And one thing worth mentioning is when it comes to takedown defense, this is something I feel like is overlooked a little bit, is just having really good footwork and distance management is just a really key factor in being able to stuff takedowns. Gane, he's going to be moving around in there, darting in and out of the pocket. He's going to be feinting, giving Jones a ton of different looks, and early on, that might be hard for Jones to really get a read on when to shoot. So, I think that could give Jones some issues. And, on top of that, it's also worth noting that even though Jones has put on some weight, Gane still will be much bigger than a lot of the light heavyweights that Jones has faced in there. Probably a bit more agile as well. And, Gane should probably hit a little harder than some of the light heavyweights that have hit Jones, even though Gane isn't a particularly big hitter at heavyweight. So, just some factors to really consider here. But the fact that this line has kind of gotten more so on the Jones side makes me lean more on the Gane side, actually, because I do think ultimately it's a pretty 50-50 fight. A lot of unknowns on the Jones side, but official pick, I think I'm just going to go Gane here. I think he's going to be able to keep it standing and maybe do enough to win a very competitive decision here. So official pick, I'll go with Gane to win by decision.